Hello and welcome to One on One. I'm your host, Mfundo Mabalani. Now, today on the show, we're joined by a political game changer, as some say, a former Bantustan leader. He's the founder and current leader of the UDM, Mr. Bantu Holomisa. General, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much.
Now, let's start with your home province, the Eastern Cape. Now, the Eastern Cape was home to leaders of the liberation movement such as Nelson Mandela, Robert Sobukwe, Steve Biko, Walter Sisulu, just to name a few. And for quite some time, it influenced the politics of the country. Transkei in particular now was the site of government's first experiment of a homeland system. Take us through your childhood in rural Nkandule.
Well, at the time, I was a head boy, but also schooling at lower primary school at Upper Ngungu. And I used to go to school, and then after that I would come back home and see to it that the animals, sheep and cattle, are brought back home safe. And I had to count and report that all is well. And then the following day, I would release those to the field and then go back to school. Well, that background has helped to shape myself to know when you are given an instruction or an order, you carry that instruction. You don't ask too many questions.
Now, that sounds like a very humble background, but you are in fact a son of a chief. And my understanding is that there was a tradition where, as members of the royal family of children, there was a tradition yokufihla kwebantwana benkosi. Can you take us through the reasoning of that type of a tradition where you're taken away from your family?
Well, in that instance, as the sons of chiefs and daughters would always be taken away from their home, believing that if you stay there, you might catch up with the evil spirits, or you may be kidnapped or assassinated or something like that. So fortunately, I was one of those who was whisked away not to grow up in my home, but to a family friend's place not far away from there. And fortunately, the person who looked after me was a teacher by profession and a religious preacher. And the discipline of that family also played a role in molding myself.
And then comes to the politics of the day at that time. We had traditional leaders. Of these traditional leaders, we had those that collaborated with the apartheid or homeland system. We also had those that were part of the system, but only to undermine it from within, the likes of Sabata Dalindyebo. And then we had those that outrightly rejected that system, like Nelson Mandela. Where did your father fall?
The issue of Transkei, you will find that the father of Mbeki, Governor Mbeki, King Sabata Dalindyebo, Mr. Kuzana, and many others who were fighting for the change of South Africa were part of the Bunga legislation. My father was part of that, but he was loyal to the king King Dalindyebo. He was like a councillor because he fell under Dalindyebo. But on the other hand, because he married to a family of the Matanzima.
Yes.
So there was that balancing act he had to juggle around. But at the end of the day, the chiefs were given extra ex officio positions in parliament in Transkei. So you didn't have to be a political ideologue to support a particular individual. But I guess that the relationship between him and Matanzima and King Sabata Dalindyebo
was a very tricky one.
It was a very tricky one.
And then comes to your political ideology or shaping of your political outlook. Talk to me about your relationship with Advocate Dumisani Ntsebenza.
Well, the advocate Dumisa Ntsabeza taught us at Jongilizwe College, a college for sons of chiefs and headmen. And among other subjects he taught us was the international relations, that is current affairs, as well as conduct of public affairs, and also the African law. It was called then the Bantu law, a book written by Sima. I think it's prescribed at university level. It was more teaching us about different cultures in the continent. And then, of course, he taught us taught us history, English. So Dumisa Ntsabeza was a young fellow at the time. But on the other hand, during weekends, we used to visit his place, myself in particular, General Matanzima, and General Mgwebi. This is where we met late Matthew Goniwe. During weekends, they talk serious politics, and we learned a lot from him.
And we actually want to get to Goniwe and the death at some point. But now to you enlisting as a defense force military, you decide to become a soldier. You know, you're coming from a family where education is valued, your mother is a nurse, you decide to enlist. Why that decision?
And Chief Bazindlovu was a soldier as well.
Yes.
He participated in the Second World War. So there was nothing funny, so I was trying to emulate what he had done. But on a serious note, I was recruited by my colleagues who were studying at Jongilizwe College when I arrived there. And they said to me, because you play rugby, we want you to end the Transkei Colors rugby side. In order to do so, you must keep fit, so we think that military will help you.
Okay.
So I joined the Defense Force. I resigned at Post Office in 1976. When I arrived at the Defense Force, the situation changed altogether. I was insulted by instructors with all sorts of languages and being said to us as recruits. Then we were told to take the hair cut off and so on. After 13 months training, then I enjoyed the Defense Force. Then I went to enroll with the band section. But the military instructors, infantry instructors said, no, you can't go and play music and instruments there. You must go and join the infantry side. This is, your career is on this side. So I enrolled as a military instructor. And then later on, I was enrolled, I was chosen to do officer's course. And at that stage, the Transkei Defense Force was still very new, and it looked for people with degrees and those who passed matric, and they would go straight to officer's course. So I was fortunate that I was spotted at that early stage.
And then you moved through the ranks.
Moved through the ranks, did courses in Transkei. The only course I did in South Africa was in 1984, and that was a senior staff course where we were the first two blacks to have joined the white South Africans to do a course. I've never came to South Africa then to do a course which is designed for blacks only. So Transkei Defense Force resisted that. And I was the pioneer to say, I'm not going to go to a college where only a college for the blacks. I want to sit in a classroom with white South Africans. And I didn't shame myself and General Mtukaka. We did very well in that course.
And then your defiant spirit throughout these years, because, I mean, I've even read your book, The Game Changer. You seemed to have had this defiant spirit throughout. You fought for what was right, you fought against corruption, but you generally were not scared.
It's not a defiance more than being a principled person, and also to apply what you were taught. that is, be able to identify the do's and don'ts. At my early stage in my life, and also when I went to join the Defense Force at Jonglizo College, right through it was discipline. So if 1 + 1 makes 2, you can't make -1.
No, true enough. And then comes your detention. Perhaps to start with Operation Katsen, which subsequently led to your detention. Talk us through that.
Operation Katsen was an operation by the South African Security Council where they wanted to annex Ciskei and Transkei at all costs so that they can control that region. As a result of that, a lot of activists were killed by the apartheid. One of those people during that period of assassinations in the Eastern Cape was the Goniwe and others, and many other activists. So, but some of us, we didn't believe that we have to wait for Rhodesians, then the Seller Scouts, who were appointed to train the Transkei Defense Force by Matanzima in 1981, that they should tell us that Transkei and Ciskei must be one, on the advice of the boss of the SANDF in Port Elizabeth, Brigadier van der Westhuizen. So we were not briefed on this, and we resisted it. But in resisting it, some of us ended up being targeted by both Pretoria government as well as those Rhodesian Seller Scouts, and I ended up being detained.
You were trapped. You walked into a trap.
It's not a trap because I didn't care at them, because I knew the day they arrested me, I told them, the security forces, police, that you must go and tell Chief George Matanzima that I'm going to come out of this because I've done nothing wrong.
But that psyche, I mean, your determination, at some point, I don't know if it's military training on confidence, that even in the face of fear, you were so confident you confused the enemy. You had your juniors. You were detained, you were the prisoner. But you were instructing your juniors that you go and you instruct and tell Matanzima to charge me. I want to know why I'm being charged. And they were confused, forget you're the prisoner. They go back, they listen to you. That psyche of being so confident and confusing the enemy.
The problem they had is that they used the security section of the act, and I was detained by the police. But the people who came to take statements from me was the Seller Scouts, the Defense Force personnel. And then I objected to this. I said, but I was arrested by the police. Why are you interfering? They said, no, they have been so sent by Chief George Matanzima, the Prime Minister. I said, go back. He must sign a letter to say he has authorized you. Then I can speak to you. Indeed, Chief George Matanzima signed a letter to say, this is to direct you that you must cooperate with so-and-so. Then I said, thank you. Then I said, all right, let me give you my statement. And after that, I said, this is strange that a prime minister can get involved in a case like this. I smell fish.
And then later
Smelled something fishy. I told them.
And then later on, you're released eventually. And then we fast track to the coup. Contrary to what some believe, and you actually realize that there are parts of South African history that some don't know, particularly the children of today. When we had Mangope pass on, you had some talking about Bantustan leaders, and then you're also put in there. And then some say, no, let us distinguish if we talk about an apartheid collaborator and those that defy the system or undermine the system from within. You are part of the coup. You were not anointed. You decided that you were going to take power, rule by military decree. Take us through that process and the decision.
Well, the coup of Transkei government then was preceded by commissions of inquiries. And the findings of those commission of inquiry pointed fingers to the government officials, including the Prime Minister, Chief George Matanzima. And we took a decision as senior officers to go and see Chief George Matanzima, and we advised him that in light of these nauseating exposés coming out of the commission, won't you consider to take an early exit so that you can allow your political party to elect a new prime minister? Chief George Matanzima agreed. And then he said to us he's going to go to Pretoria and meet Big Bota to thank them. They have been working with him. I said, no, that's your business. We don't want to interfere in the politics. But he failed to come back after a week. Then we started to press panic buttons. We said, we thought maybe, what if he is arranging with Pretoria to come and arrest us? Then we immediately forced all those ministers and DGs who were implicated in the commission, including himself. We forced them to resign. And then we said their political party, Transkei Independence Political Party, must elect a new prime minister. That is when Stella Star was elected. Unfortunately for her, 86 days later, we uncovered another expose where she was implicated in a 2 million rands paid by Sol Kesner to the cabinet in exchange for exclusive gambling right in Transkei. Then the soldiers, when they discussed this, they said, no, man, it looks as though that all these apples in this basket are rotten. We rather tell them to go back home, all of them. Then that's how we got into head the government.
And then the general is in power. First day, you're overwhelmed. You're there, you're saying, somehow we'll fake it until we make it. Let's just take charge.
Well, it was good when the plan was over without any blood having been shed. But in the afternoon, we were looking at each other in the ops room and say, how do you run a government?
Yes.
And then the situation became worse 2 days after that because we had declared a martial law. So our legal advisor, Zem Titus, came to us, state law advisor, and said, gentlemen, we have a problem. The Chief Justice and the judges have never implemented a martial law. How is it going to be done? We look at each other and we didn't know what to say. But one had to think on his toes. We said, in view of the fact that there was no blood shed and everything went smoothly when we took over, we now lift the martial law and that our courts, independent courts, civilian courts will continue and the normal life will continue, no state of emergency.
Now, where's Pretoria in all of this? Because later on in the years, the ANC, when they wrote that article, The Rise and Fall of Bantu Holomisa, would go on to criticize just the response to that coup, to say that response.
Well, talk about the ANC, those are the opportunists of the highest order. They used that space in Transkei when we were in charge. But as you know, once you differ with them, they call you with names. Ask Mbeki how they castigated him after they removed him. Ask even Zuma. Today, he's nothing. So you ask many of the ANC, once you differ with them, they call you with names. But the coup of Transkei, we briefed the ambassador of Pretoria at the same time when we were when we were conducting the coup at 12 o'clock on the 31st of December. We sent Colonel Dooley to go and brief the ambassador. And the reasons for our coup were clear. We gave him the documents, bank statement, which Sol Kesner paid to bribe the entire cabinet. They had no chance to intervene.
But nevertheless, we had the likes of Eugene de Kock saying that you, in fact, were an military intelligence project gone wrong. And if somebody were to interpret that statement, it is to say that at some point you were an apartheid frontman, but you betrayed them. What is your take on that?
Well, it might be true, because anybody who served in the structures of apartheid would always be dubbed as an agent or as a sympathizer to the system. But in our case, we changed that immediately when we took over a Transkei government, because we established as early as 1988 relations with ANC in Lusaka and PAC in Tanzania. So for them to have uttered those words, I didn't even know that person for that matter.
At the time?
Not at all, because we're not collaborating with them at that level, not at political level.
Now, this is 1988. Some then went on to say that relationship itself, your assistance of MK and APLA members, was opportunistic according to them. You know, they've labeled you a populist for the longest time. Now, they said that was opportunistic. The time was coming. The apartheid system was going to be defeated. It was written, and you decided to position yourself favorably for that eventuality. That, so that I'm going, according to some.
So that means I deserve a medal then for having assisted them. Because when they negotiated that deal, they came into South Africa being promised that everything will be rosy. You would have expected that MK, for instance, and the APLA would have come with convoy from Swaziland, from Beitbridge, from Mozambique, to say we have conquered. But when they came back, not a single one came carrying a weapon, even a pistol. When de Klerk unleashed the so-called black-on-black violence in 1990, it was Transkei who protected their leaders. So we deserve a medal rather than be discredited by them.
Talk to me about your relationship with the former statesman, Nelson Mandela, and how perhaps your submissions at the TRC, particularly on Mayor Stella Sqau, affected that relationship.
With Madiba, as you know, we started to work with him a few weeks after he was released, because Winnie Mandela said that there's no way that Madiba would be protected by apartheid police or security. So she doesn't contemplate that the ANC in exile can request that. So Winnie Mandela requested us to protect Madiba. We provided that service until MK came back in July, August. And then they took over the protection of Madiba. We covered all the rallies. But with Madiba, when I went to see him, I said to him, "Is this your house?" He was staying in Soweto, in a four-roomed house there. I said, how do you protect yourself in a place like this? How do you practice your customs? Are you sure here you are not even allowed to slaughter a goat and so on? He says, yes, Bantu, it's true. I said, how about going back and revive your home so that when you want to exercise your customs and your kids and your families, you can have what you would call a home in the rural areas. He bought into that idea. That's why in his book he mentioned that he built his first house in Kuno on the advice of General Holomisa.
And so the relationship began.
The relationship continued even when I was expelled. Madiba was a mischievous fellow. He would invite me to come to his house and says, Bantu, Comrade Thabo and Ngamalala are going to be here tomorrow and the entire NEC. I want you to welcome them. They are here to wish me a happy birthday. And then I would say, well, but I'm not an ANC. He says, well, Bantu, the politics of African National Congress and those of the United Party are left outside this yard. I said, no, UDM that. United Democratic Movement, not United Party. Whatever, Bantu. So he was just dismissing me that he sees me as a leader of a political party. So we continued that relationship up until his last day.
Your expulsion. We live in an era of names these days. Everybody wants a list. I'm sure even on social media they want to know. Who was against your expulsion? I know the likes of Mambwini Matikizela Mandela was against it. Matthew Sposa. How many people came to your defense?
Well, in the NEC, I still remember Posa, Winnie, and very few who were openly opposing my expulsion. But I didn't care damn about all of them, because I've already told Mandela that if you say I must apologize for what I've said in the TRC regarding the corruption of Transkei, you are speaking to a wrong person. That will not happen. Even if it means you will have to remove me from your cabinet, I'm ready.
Hey.
Later on, they said they are going to send me to DC. Of course, I was removed from the cabinet, and then they said they will send me to the DC. And then I said, no, but you, not a single one of you here qualified to charge me. Because when I mentioned the word of Sol Kesner, the whole organization or leadership panicked beyond comprehension, because you are funded by the same culprit, Sol Kesner.
I want to talk about this at length, and particularly the files that everybody always said you at some point would somehow leak certain files, which led to some saying that perhaps, if nothing else, you had sources within the apartheid DMI structures. But we'll talk about that after this short break. We continue the conversation with Mr. Bantu Holomisa just after this.